Let me welcome all of you. It's a great pleasure for me to even be standing here next to you because some months ago I was really quite ill and was in a coma for 26 hours, unfortunately. So the good news is I teach at 5 universities, and now I tell my students the only questions I can answer are the ones I can remember. Okay. Apparently they said you lose your short-term memory or something like that, so what can we do? The title of this session is really quite unusual, especially because of the panel we have. Okay? Our panelists include authors. It includes people who speak publicly like this. As I say, they write books, they write articles. They have a wealth of experience. They're even entrepreneurs. They have companies in parts of the world that I have never even visited, okay? And so they have all kinds of important things to say about what I would call the alleviation of poverty. But the reason I'm here is because I had the great pleasure as a student to study with Professor Peter Bauer, who was a professor at the London School of Economics, but was visiting at the University of Chicago, where I did my studies in economics. And his specialty was third world economies and why they remain poor. So I was not curious about that, to be honest, at all, okay? But because he was what we call a welfare economist, he cared about third world countries and what they could do to extricate themselves from poverty, I became very interested in the subject. Now, I'm also interested in the subject for another reason, and that is I had the pleasure of joining the faculty at the University of Cape Town back in 1978. In fact, in 1976, blacks were not permitted in the graduate school, and I visited South Africa for the first time in '76 at the invitation of Anglo-American Corporation and its chairman, Mr. Harry Oppenheimer. And he insisted that I give guest lectures at 14 graduate schools around South Africa, which I proceeded to do. And then I was interviewed. There was no television in '76, not until 1978. So South African Broadcasting had an interview, always with a foreign visitor, to the country, at 7:45 in the morning. It was called Special Report, and for some crazy reason, they invited me on the program. And the interviewer said to me, "You've been invited to join the faculty at the University of Cape Town, but you turned them down. Is it the long distance?" I said, no, it's not the long distance. South African Airways flies almost nonstop from New York to Johannesburg, and it's only 2 hours more to Cape Town. And if anybody went to Cape Town, they would never want to leave. That's how beautiful it is. The mountains come right down to the sea. I said, no, I turned it down because they don't permit black students at the graduate school. And the man said to me, but they're not qualified. I said, I know. So if they're not qualified, why do they have a rule forbidding them to try? That did not go over too well. Anyway, he said, how would you solve the problem? I said, it's not my business, but if it were up to me, I could design a 1-year program in reading, writing, math, and social studies, and if people then passed my final exam, they could enter. And that was the end of the interview. I went back to my hotel, and Mr. Oppenheimer called me on the phone. And he said, how do you like to do that? I said, what are we talking about here? It's against the rules. He said, I am the honorary chancellor of the University of Cape Town, and I was just on the phone with the president of the university, and the president said, if you design the course, they will publicize the course, and if people pass, they will be admitted to the University of Cape Town. True story. No. I don't want to use up all the time, but it gets much better. What happens after that is that I said to Mr. Oppenheimer, it'll take me about 3 months to do it. I'd rather do it here than go back to New York, so what would I do? He said, you'll be my house guest. Incidentally, in the guest bedroom, they had the New York Times top 10 fiction on one side and top 10 nonfiction on the other side. And I said to him one day, why are they there? Any of them that you start, you take home with you. So I was going home like this. Anyway, 39 students entered the program in 1977, and sad to say, only 17 passed. But those 17 were admitted to the University of Cape Town Graduate School at the beginning of 1978, and I became a professor there in July of 1978 because the students were there. Here comes the best part of the story. Did you know that when Mandela and Walter Sisulu and I think the third one were in Robben Island for 27 years, the only thing they were permitted to read was The Economist magazine, which did a teeny weeny story on what I had done. And so they made a deal that if they ever got out of there, they would visit New York and thank me for doing it. Well, they were too old, except for Nelson, so when Nelson Mandela came to New York, we had a black mayor at that time, a fantastic man, a great tennis player, but not much of a mayor. And he called me and he said, there are 383 people on Nelson Mandela's list for New York. We know everybody on the list. Why the hell would he be interested in seeing you? I said I wouldn't tell you, but he'll tell you when he comes. I was teaching at that time at Columbia University, and so Mandela came to Columbia University, and I thanked him immensely because of the police security we had in my building at the Columbia. Never safer ever to come and visit me at that time. So Mandela came, and we became friends, believe it or not. Every time I went to South Africa to teach, he invited me to visit with him as the state president. It was really quite amazing. Anyway, but I'm interested in South Africa because, listen, there's a fantastic black middle class there now, but the country's growth rate is less than 1% a year. And the overwhelming majority of people there remain terribly poor. The question is, why is that happening? And I am not going to tell you that now. I want to give you an incentive to stay to the very end. In the meantime, I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers here. The first one I would like to have come up here is Doug Casey. And the reason for that is he did not meet me this morning. Okay, I wanted to have the people meet me, and so we could talk about, so he's going to introduce himself to you. I was going to have something to say, but Doug, why don't you come up here and give us about...
Do I have to do that? Can I sit down? And it's a panel. I don't want to feel like a speaker. If I'm a speaker, you got to pay me some money, and I'm not getting any money.
Well, no,
so I'm just a
in
panelist.
that case, you've convinced me. You can stay where you are.
All right. Okay, my name is Doug Casey. I don't know how I introduce myself. I'm an author, I'm a speculator, and relevant to this panel, it was my first book, The International Man, that became the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia, when Rhodesia was still a country. So that's a title for that book that's never going to be taken away from it, because Rhodesia doesn't exist anymore. That book that I wrote was a guidebook to making the most of your personal freedom and financial opportunity around the world. And when I took it to Rhodesia and interviewed a couple publishers and got along with one, he could see that there were 250,000 Europeans there that were looking to make the chicken run. It was at the height of the war, actually. The end of the war, but the height of the war. And that book flew off the shelves. So that's part of what I do, is write stuff. One of my hobbies is going around the world and interviewing presidents, preferably military dictators. I prefer them, preferably in ex-people's republics or current people's republics. There aren't many left. And pitching the president on a way that he can become personally and legitimately wealthy, because you can't steal money the way Marcos and Mobutu and those guys used to do as effectively. Become popular with the people. They like that. Beats a 45 to the back of the head when the next criminal takes over the government. And turn the country into Singapore on steroids, but in half the time. So I always get a hearing, and that's my hobby. Next on my dance card is Togo, I believe. So I do that. So I spend a lot of time going around the third world. I live most of the year in Argentina and Uruguay, two dysfunctional countries, but probably less dysfunctional than most of Latin America, believe it or not. And my answer to the third world problem is I'm an anarcho-capitalist. Government is the problem. Government is absolutely the whole of the problem. It's corrupting, it's destructive, the institution itself is evil, and I can't believe that people give these governments respect and chap and clap and cheer and vote for people that run for office. That's my introduction. I gave a little presentation. That's more than an introduction. I did the wrong thing, didn't I? Take it out of the rest of my time.
Well, no, please. Doug, I would like to ask you a question. You have decades of experience. You have visited all of these places. And when you say that government is the problem, governments provide an enormous number of important services that they should be able to provide at even lower cost than the private sector might of the specific things they do. Why is it that in some countries where government does it, the country is successful? In other countries where the government, you say, is the principal problem, they can't get themselves out of poverty. Have you, based on your experience, detected those differences and can help give us some guidance?
Well, part of the answer to the question is the culture of the country. And from my point of view, the only culture that is worth the powder to blow it to hell is Western civilization. The rest of the civilizations, so-called, in the rest of the world are worth nothing. That's not to say I don't like some of the exports of the Orient. Oh, politically incorrect term. You're not supposed to say that anymore. I like yoga. I like martial arts. I like Oriental cuisine. What else? Zen. I like that. But that's pretty well the sum total of the rest of the world's contribution to civilization. Those things. I think I've summed it up. Okay? So, insofar as okay, that's what the rest of the world brings to the party. Why doesn't, look, government doesn't work. Where government has taken over all these services, providing all these marvelous things the governments provide, anything that the people want, if people want it, entrepreneurs will provide it for a profit. And the answer to your question, let me give you an analogy. In the days of the Soviet Union, people asked, well, if the government didn't make our Ladas and Moskoviches, what will we do for cars? And of course, people in the West are not quite as stupid that way. We say, well, if the government didn't build the roads and didn't build the sewers, who would build them? It's the same answer as you could have given to a Soviet citizen about cars. Everything that the government does that's worthwhile, and most of what it does is not only not worthwhile but counterproductive, has been usurped from the market by the government and the terrible people it attracts.
Well, let me just say something about that. First of all, I think your broad brush is way too broad. The Ivory Coast, Senegal, South Africa even, they've been very successful countries for a long period of time. And now they've gone into a decline. The question is, do we have principles that will help us understand what has caused them to go either from poverty to wealth or from wealth to poverty? What's happening? After all, they had government there in both cases.
One of these guys should pick up the ball where I've left it.
No, they're going to have that chance too. But if you insist, we'll do exactly that. We're going to turn now to Mr. Bhandari. Where are you sitting, please? Yeah. Please. Why don't you join the fray here and tell us what guidance you can give us?
Right. So the basic problem of the poor countries has to do with the cultures of these countries. 2/3 of the world, and I'm talking about everything outside the Western society and China, is tribal, superstitious, and irrational. It is not coming out of its tribalism and irrationality. These societies in the third world are actually getting worse by the day. This worsening has continued since the time Europeans left these third world countries. Now, these third world countries actually did not even exist before Europeans colonized these countries. Africans were hacking each other to death before Europeans arrived in Africa. Africa will implode and return back to its dark ages. so will most of Latin America, so will everything in the Middle East, and so will everything in South Asia. These are tribal people, and they will enter a phase of forever wars. Now, I am not exaggerating that these people will revert back to Malthusian equilibrium. There is simply no way out for 2/3 of the world's population. The problem for the people in this audience is that these people comprise of more than 4 billion people. And these people will be crossing the Trump wall. They will be digging under the Trump wall to enter your countries, and you simply cannot stop them. I don't have a solution to the problem, but the situation in the third world is miserable, and it's getting worse by the day.
Now, let me just make a quick comment about this. You come from a country that represents about 1/7 of the entire world's population. Okay, 1/6? Okay, sorry. Now, they were living in poverty too. From Nehru, right until recently, into the 1990s, India was one of the poorest on a per capita basis of all countries in the world. And now, India is growing at 6% per year. Their inflation is practically zero. And something has happened. Why can't the same something happen in all the countries you've just broad brushed and saying they're not only going nowhere, they're going to be going further south than where they are even now? What is it that India has taught us about what the rest of the world might do?
India is a myth. India is a myth perpetuated by the international organizations, fund managers, people who profit from glorify India. India is a shithole. India is a hellhole. I grew up in that country, and I'm going to be back in that country in 2 weeks' time. I have spent half of my life living in that country. I go back to that country 4 times a year. Indian growth can be attributed to only one thing, and that is also the reason behind the growth of the rest of these shitholes and hellholes that you hear about, which comprise of 2/3 of the world population. And the reason is internet. Internet enabled wage arbitrage to happen, and internet allowed for transfer of technologies to these third world countries. These countries did not wake up. These countries did not become enlightened. They merely got the crumbs that fell from the Western society. And these people have been beneficiary of this thing. Now, look at Indian GDP per capita, which is $2,134 US per capita per year. Now, that is really not a lot of money if you think about it. An average Indian lives on less than $200 a month, and more than 60 to 80% of that country lives on less than $2 a day. A lot of that money has happened because of technology and the green revolution that happened in the 1960s. And these people are very, very rapidly destroying the benefits they got from the technology, either through war, civil conflicts, or reproducing too much.
I am having a nightmare. Tell me, when is this conference supposed to start? Listen, you're not going to believe this, but one of the places that I teach is in Hyderabad, at the graduate school there. And the place is filled with professors of economics and political science and law who are my friends. And we've been examining this question in India for quite some time, about now 4 years. Would you believe that some of the most successful companies in the world are in India? What's that? Yes, Ratan Tata was a client of mine. I implemented my ideas at Tata Consultancy Services. I tried to do it at Tata Automotive, but they were busy buying the automobile assets of the Ford Motor Company that were a failure, called Land Rover and Jaguar. These are fantastic companies. They employ hundreds of thousands of people in India, and they're all doing brilliantly. The economy, I'm not joking, it's growing at 6% a year with no inflation, and it's one of the great success stories in the world. More successful, by the way, let me tell you. When I was asked almost 10 years ago, should we invest money in China or should we invest money in India? I said, oh, definitely India. And they said, really, why? I said, well, you know, the British were not very nice to the people in India, but they did leave behind an open suitcase full of the legal system of the UK. Nobody talks about the Indian people stealing technology from Americans. That does not exist. We do business in India. I opened in China. Guess what? I went to a company. They said, we're going to hire you. We go to another company, and we found our things already there only a day after we visited with the first company. I said, how did that happen? Oh, he's my friend. And you're in China now, they said. I hate to tell you this. We had to fire 18 people we had just very carefully hired because they wouldn't go to our office in Singapore or Kuala Lumpur. I said, listen, I can't afford to keep you in China because we're not going to do business with people who are cheating. India, they don't cheat. India is a pleasure to do business. By the way, what is wrong with ICICI Bank? They're a fantastic organization and innovative and brilliant. So what he said, he's being dismissed. We're not going to listen to him anymore.
Well, can I quickly respond to you?
No. Hang on, you're going to have a chance to do that because now it's time for Rakesh, who is sitting next to me and is twice my size. He will protect me from the other two panelists. Right?
In your dreams.
In your dreams. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's been enough talk about theory now. I'll take you to what happened in 2010. We were in Nepal and it was Valentine's Day. In Nepal, we were running a business, casinos. Our company was running 8 casinos. I was directly managing 6 casinos. And we were in the Shangri-La Hotel over there, nothing to do with the international Shangri-La chain. And we get a call that one of our casinos at the Yakinyati Hotel in Nepal has been taken over by the king's son-in-law at noon time. And we got a call at about a little bit after noon time. The union, which was the Maoist union, has just welcomed him to the casino, garlanded him as the owner. And that was it. That is how the ownership passed to the new owners. I did not sign any papers, nothing I had done. To give you the background, the Maoist party had been declared a terrorist organization by the US. It was fighting a civil war. And the prime minister before that was a person called Koirala, GP Koirala, who had become a good friend of ours. And that's what Doug Casey talks about, going to third world countries and you can meet the dictator or whoever he is. Here he was the elected prime minister and he was friendly with us. And we had a good run for a number of years. I was there for 17 years before I finally left in 2010. He said to finish the civil war, which had maybe costed Nepal 12,000 lives, he entered into a ceasefire with Prachanda, who was the Maoist leader. And as a result of which, there were elections. The Maoist party, because they made extravagant promises, and the elections were under threat and intimidation by the Maoists, they won they were the single largest party. I think they got 220 out of 570 seats in the Constituent Assembly. And that was when our nightmare started. The Maoist unions threw out all the other unions, and nobody could go against them. They were a terrorist organization. The king's son-in-law had approached Prachanda, who was the prime minister from 2008 to 2009. He had to exit because he tried to remove the chief of the army. It wasn't successful. Now he was trying to collect money. He made a deal with the king's son-in-law to hand him over the casino. After removing the king, now the king's son-in-law is coming back to take over the casino. He made the deal. He called the union leader of that particular casino, Casino Royal, to his home, to his office, and told him, okay, I understand that you are the union leader. I'm telling you to hand over the casino to Raj Bahadur Singh. He'll come on such date, and the casino was handed over to that person. I don't know how it happened. The employees became his employees. Our bankroll, which I don't know how much it was, but it could be around $200,000 at that time, was taken over by them. All our vehicles, everything was taken over by them. So I went to see him. I went to meet Prachanda. So I get an audience from Prachanda, and he says, "Oh, I believe you have 6 other casinos. I thought you were not interested in running them. So what if I hand over one of them to him? And now look here, don't do anything. You have 5 other casinos. If you want to peacefully run them, then just keep quiet. What is done is done." So I said, okay, but it was not going to happen like that. They were going to get greedy, and ultimately all the casinos fell like this to various people. Of course, each casino, maybe we were valuing it at $10 million. So if the new owner gets it for $500 million, he has to give maybe $200,000 or $300,000 to the hotel, $300,000 he gives to Prachanda, and he takes over our casino. That's how it happened. Of course, they could not run it. And in 2010, when other casinos also started to fall in a similar manner, one was in fact taken over by the union leader himself, who was always after us to give more and more money to the staff. When he took over the casino himself, salaries, nothing could be paid there. He wanted all the money for himself. In any case, it had got too much, and in 2010, in November, we had the police coming to our house. I was not over there. At that time, they came to arrest me. There were no charges, nothing. Even now, there are no charges against me, as I found out. But I had enough, because this was not going to last. In any case, before this takeover, the Maoists were in de facto control of the cash and the casinos in any case. They were taking pretty much what they wanted. So why did they do this? Because they could get a whole lot more. They knew we didn't have more money to pay the salaries or to pay our liabilities. The only way he could make more money out of this was to physically pass over the possession to the new owners. Anybody would be willing to take it much cheaper. Now you could ask me the question, why were we not willing to pay him the $500,000? Just imagine if it's your house, you own the house. Would you be, and the house is costing you $10 million. You have a $10 million equity in the house. So if somebody tells you, now you've got to pay $500,000 to stay in the house, would you pay him? No. But if somebody else gets it for $500,000, why not? So that's just one of the things which happens. This is not the end of the story. One of the casinos had been constructed by our company. It was 51,000 square feet in the most deluxe Crown Plaza hotel over there. So that was also taken over and given to someone else. So I had enough. I had exited Nepal, but my partner, an American gentleman by the name of Adi Turtle, he said, turn over all the shares to me. I said, okay, fine, and I'll fight the case. Now, he's fighting the case. It's been the last 7 years. He was approached by someone on behalf of the Chief Justice saying that, well, you're going to make a lot of money. He filed a $20 million suit. I need $1.5 million. So my partner, who's almost 80 years old, he doesn't have the money. He said, why? He said, well, you're going to come into a lot of money if I give you a decision in your favor. So I want my share.
Okay.
So,
the question is, what lessons do we learn from your
that's what I'm going to leave it to the panel over here. That's what I'm going to leave the people over here. If this is the kind of thing which happens, right, you can write books, and I've read The Bottom Billion, by Paul Collier. It's all theoretical over there. But as long as this is the kind of thing happens, the poverty over there, and Nepal is one of the poorest countries, is of their own making. And no amount of aid from here is going to rectify that. It's going to go all into a shithole, as he says, in any case. So stop giving them aid. These are rogue regimes. I don't know what you can do about them.
So you're suggesting that the poverty that continues is caused by graft and corruption?
Well, I mean, corruption, in fact, as Milton Friedman said, bad as it may be, serves a purpose. It keeps the wheels of commerce churning. For example, I was in the, going back during the time of the king, I was at the Solti Oberoi Hotel as a financial controller. We had 3 people, 3 staff, who was dedicated to chasing files for purposes of imports. Now, Nepal is a country which makes nothing. And where do they get their money from? Because there are no jobs available. The biggest earner for Nepal is people going abroad. They go to the Middle East, they go to Southeast Asia, and whoever can't get jobs over there goes to India. That's the default country where they go to, where they don't need visas and other things. Yeah. And the remittances they send back keeps the economy alive. Now, in this situation, if we have the air conditioning in the hotel, nothing is there. We have to import parts, we have to import things continuously. I had 3 people chasing the Ministry of Tourism because it requires multiple approvals at that time to import anything. Yeah. Ministry of Tourism was involved over there, Ministry of Industry was involved over there, the Nepal Rashtra Bank, which is the Federal Reserve Bank, was involved over there. And guess what? In all the 3 places, you had to pay money to get your things done. Was it a bad thing? Probably not, because if we could not pay money and get things done, things would not be done. Why would a bureaucrat move the file from here to here if it's not made worth his while? Yeah. And this hotel was managed by the Oberois. I was working on behalf of the Oberois, and it was owned by the person who would become the king subsequently. Yeah. It was owned by the brother of the king. Yeah. So this is the problem that is faced over there. So corruption is just one part of the issue. Corruption, of course, in this case, if he gets money, he hands over the casino to someone else. Of course, it resulted in the entire industry being closed. About 8,000 to 10,000 people lost their jobs when the casinos moved like this, and the new owners realized how difficult it was, and then the Maoists had to backtrack. They were in de facto control. They had to get rid of the de facto control and let other owners come, and now the situation is far better. Unfortunately, we have lost everything, though we had a good run for 17 years. But what mistake we made was we kept investing money in Nepal. We kept investing in new casinos over there. We kept investing in buildings over there. And in this kind of situation now, if you're wiser by the experience, what would happen is that you keep your basic working capital, do business over there. There's probably money to be made over there. And the people are going to love you because they get some employment opportunities. That takes me to another thing. When we were hiring people in '93 for the first Casino Everest I opened over there, I didn't have to advertise for the staff over there. I had lists from the Ministry of Tourism, the Chief of Police, the Chief of Customs, the King, the royal family. Everybody wanted their people to be absorbed over there, and we picked and chose people from there.
Why would?
And I told the minister, "You're the minister for the whole country. What are you going to do if I employ 100 people from your ministry?" He said, "Oh, forget about it. Just take these people."
Hang on a second. Look. Let's assume you're told to hire these people. Obviously, if you're told to hire people, they're not going to be as effective as other people you might interview for the job and hire the best people you can find. The question is, what needs to be done in these countries in order to move to a higher level of performance? That's an issue. But I just want to make one comment of my own. I'm interested in poverty in this country. The Democrats have been yakking away now for the last 16 months that we have income and wealth inequality, and we've got to do something about it. You probably don't remember what Hillary Clinton was going to do about it, and I'm not here to remind you. But I want you to know something. There is no question that escaping from poverty in a democracy is not a difficult thing. The key to it is completing your education. You've got to hear what's going on in this country. Would you believe, amongst the so-called minority group, almost 70% are not graduating from high school? If the average person who graduates from high school will earn $400,000 more in a 40-year career than somebody who drops out. If they go to university, they will earn 1.2 million more than if they don't graduate from university. And if they go to graduate school, they will earn almost 2.3 million more than the college graduate. Now, if those people do the calculation as I have, and they save, true, a higher number than most people do, but they save 6% of their salary, and they merely invest it in index funds, whose compounded rate of return, with dividends reinvested, is approximately 9.5% a year. Are you ready for a surprise? People who graduate from college will retire on over $5 million in current dollars. Even the high school graduate, if they can save anything. But those people who don't graduate from high school will never earn enough to save almost anything. And that is what accounts for the difference in terms of income inequality. It's the fact that you have monies that you can save, you do save, and earn at least this average rate of return. And nobody's talking about it, except our vice president, thank goodness. Vice President Pence has been on this tack now for several months, and I'm glad he is, because the same is true in South Africa. If they don't graduate from high school, they call it matric, they're in the same boat we're talking about in our own country. In other words, the secret to alleviating poverty, aside from this problem of corruption that you talk about, with which I agree, is to acquire an investment in your own human capital and take full advantage of it during your career. It will make all the difference in the world. Why don't we go back over? Doug, we started with you. Why don't we listen to any further comments you'd like to make so that I'm making fewer?
Well, I don't know where to start, but I disagree with just about everything you've said, or at least the basis upon which you're saying it. Everybody goes to college today, and increasingly a college degree is worthless, not just because everybody has one, but because, look, it goes back to what Jayant said earlier, the culture of the country. It used to be, the reason why the United States was successful, more successful than any other country in history, was not because of education. I mean, that's not what made the United States successful. What made the United States successful was that it was uniquely oriented towards concepts like individual liberty, capitalism, individual responsibility, personal freedom, the rule of law, freedom of speech. In other words, societal concepts like that. And education is just one of many fruits on that tree that I just described. And when people advocate, well, everybody ought to get an education, the question you've got to ask yourself is, well, who's going to provide the education? And at whose expense is that education going to be provided? And what's going to be taught to them? I mean, the idiots that go to college today, and basically it's true, something like 65% of all the college professors are, if they're not Marxists, they're at least Keynesians. In fact, I'd say it's probably more like 90%. And they take these gentle lambs that come there when they're 18, and they're inculcated with all these poisonous ideas, and they're corrupted, and they tend to believe things because their elders in a position of authority tell them. So no, actually education in today's world isn't the answer. It's actually a corrupting influence. But I could go on. I don't want to do that because we've got three other people on the panel.
Doug, I have three firms that I'm the chairman of, and we hire the best students, the graduates that we can find, and they turn out to be fabulous people. I don't only recruit at George Mason University or at the University of Chicago. No matter where I go, there are people. I was teaching at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, the U.S. Naval station there, and I had only 14 students in my class. Now, true, I hire University of Chicago graduates, but listen to this one. Out of 14 students, we made an offer to 4 of the students, and they've turned out to be superstars in my firm. So I reject your blanket statement that just because the professors are teaching Marxist economics, it's going to ruin our country. Take a look around. Our country is very successful. We're growing at faster rates than we've had under the last several presidents. That, of course, it's the result of what? Investment in the human capital. Where do you think it's coming from?
Well, look, I can tell you what we do at my firm. If somebody has a graduate degree, I look at them and say, listen, I can understand you're foolishly misallocating 4 years of time and maybe $250,000 of money to get an undergraduate degree, because that's kind of become the new degraded culture in the U.S., that you do these things because everybody else has marched off to college. But going on to a graduate school, you're probably not qualified to work here if you couldn't figure out something better and more productive to do with your time than misallocate all that additional time and money. So my experience is very different from yours.
I would suppose that you would omit from your blanket statement your physician, your dentist, other people who provide you with professional services.
I'm not talking about trade schools, that you need the formal discipline of a university to learn science, math, technology, engineering. Those are different. That's not what most people go to college for today. They go to college for soft things, economics, political science, sociology, gender studies, that type of thing. That's where almost all the students go today. Sure, insofar as those things, college is good for that. It's a kind of a trade school, but it doesn't give you a classical education teaching you how to be a free man. It teaches you skills that you can use to earn money. Okay, that's fine for those things.
Well, you just told us that they would be wasting their time learning those things. Didn't you just say that? My goodness. Okay, let's forget about that. Please.
Okay, so Joel, I actually, again, completely disagree with you on absolutely everything you said. And I let the audience decide that. How many people here have been to India? About India. How many have you been to India? How many of you think that Indians are honest people? So let's say about 1/3 or half of you say Indians are honest people. Indians are extraordinarily dishonest people. And anyone who has really traveled in that country realizes that in about 15 minutes of arrival in India. Now, that will not happen if you consult ICICI, Tata, IIMs, and if you go to 5-star hotels and get a chauffeur-driven Mercedes-Benz to pick you up. Your experience is of the tail end of the bell curve by doing that. You have to go and live like a normal Indian to understand how extraordinarily crooked and corrupt that country is. Now, let me just add one thing here. I know we are short of time here. Why do Indians not steal, you said? Chinese steal technology. I have just explained to you, given a chance, Indians would steal. Why do Africans don't steal technology? Why don't Middle Eastern people steal technology? You know the answer? Because they can't even steal. They are so unskilled and uneducated, they can't even copy. Copying technology has been a part of the world's history. American businessmen did that, European businessmen did that. Chinese are copying, and cheating is sometimes requires brains. African, Middle Eastern people and South Asian people don't have that, ladies and gentlemen.
What kind of a statement is that? That is, you might find this humorous. I don't. The reason is, I have an office in Singapore. I have an office in Kuala Lumpur. I've done work in the Philippines, in Indonesia. The people there are as clever as we are. I enjoy dealing with these people. And this story about India, drive through Mumbai, one after another. You've got retailers all along the road. You're telling me that when I stop to get some fruit, for example, I'm being cheated by people because they're all corrupt? What kind of a statement is that?
Well, because
My
you are
goodness.
making a typical mistake in which people don't understand statistics and probability. When you only go to Mumbai and you get driven around by a chauffeur-driven car and go to retail store, you have really, you're only experiencing 0.001% of what India is about. And this is the tail end of the bell curve. You really have to understand, you have to drive out about 20 kilometers out of Mumbai, and I'm not saying drive out even 50 kilometers out of Mumbai to really start understanding what India is. And then go to the eastern part of India, and then go to the northeastern part of India, extraordinarily corrupt in terms of culture and in terms of how the society works.
By the way, we want to have time for the audience to ask questions, although I think, as a rule, I will only permit you to ask me questions, okay? Please, why don't you come up here? We have a microphone for you. We want to listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, so, I have a question for Jayant.
Sorry, we have to be... Sorry, it's important that you hear the question from where you're sitting, and please move the mic up a bit there so you can talk right into it.
Yeah, so this is a question for Jayant. He talks about that, the Indian culture is questionable. But my question is, like, how come the same culture, same folks come here in the U.S., and Indians are the most successful immigrants here, more successful than American Jews or anybody else?
Not quite. Don't go that far.
Oh, okay.
May I tell you something? My students, I taught at Columbia University for 38 years, and the best students I ever had across the board, I teach economics, politics, and law. I want you to know the best students by far were from South Korea. The second best students were from, I'm not kidding, the second best students were from Singapore. What's the reason? It's the family culture. I asked them, I said, what's it like? And it's an amazing thing. Their parents didn't have very good jobs, but they were there when the kids came home from school, and they always would ask them this question: what did you learn today? What did you like? And what did you not like? And I have those students in my classroom. Imagine that. But my answer to you is, it's not limited to that. All kinds of other ethnic background people have been very, very successful in our country. But I can tell you, it has to start with the discipline, the self-respect that people have, that they don't cheat. It's just, it should become natural to them. Please. Thank you very much. Please.
Right. So I feel there is, a lot of truth, but there's a lot of broad brush.
Right.
So, we can't just have arbitrary statements completely like saying for everything this is true. So I think somehow the conversation got also trapped into just talking too much about India. I was hoping there would be some talk about Nigeria. They're a lot poorer place. Bangladesh is probably even way poorer. You can't also say that there is no culture in these countries. Marco Polo was not a moron to try to go all the way to China. China, India, and Iran. These were three of the richest and countries with incredible civilizations. But another thing.
Do you have a question you want to ask?
I'm born in India.
No. Do you have a question for the panel?
No. That was a comment. So I just the question is how can you have how can you have a 100% blanket statement of that sort? Basically none of those things. There are certain things. Obviously, there are. I completely agree. The infrastructure in many places in India is in really, really horrible shape. But there are places where the infrastructure, capitalism. I just came back from India.
No, we need a question, okay?
So,
right.
So how? Yeah. How can you have a blanket statement?
Okay.
If the moderator allows me to respond, I will.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so let me first respond to the Amit who asked the first question. The reason some of you see so many successful and smart Indians in the US is very simple. Because the best people leave India, okay? So this is very, very simple. You are again trying to understand a country by looking at the tail end of the bell curve. You have to understand the normal if you really want to understand the average, the normal, the median of that country. Responding to the second question the gentleman asked, why am I making a blanket statement? I did not make a blanket statement. I made a statement of the normal. I did not talk about everyone. I talked about what the average Indian is like. But let me just give a feel for what the normal about India is. I can, not here, I can go to the casino, spend the next 4 hours trying to chat with people there, and I will meet more rational people in one evening than I will have in all my life in India. So that gives you a feel for how different and how irrational, tribal, and backward these poor countries are like. And you will never, ever understand these countries unless you actually travel like a normal person. Do not stay in a 5-star hotel. Do not get a chauffeur to pick you up. Experience it by yourself. I have started 2 subsidiaries of European companies in India very successfully. You can make money, a lot of money in those countries. I was walking around with briefcases of cash to give as bribes at some point of my career. But what is important to understand is that these are extremely superstitious and tribal countries, and if you don't travel like a normal person, you will never understand these countries.
Okay, listen, we want to give the audience a chance to speak. Please, the next person.
Okay, I understand that you spent a lot of time in Uruguay. Chile and Argentina and Uruguay are very similar.
Yes, they are.
In the 1970s, Augusto Pinochet took over the government from Allende in Chile. Chile was number 6, roughly, in earning per person, and now they're tied with Uruguay for number 1.
Right.
This is a good comparison if you're looking for ways to take countries out of poverty. Latin America, those are similar cultures, similar countries. Chile does not have much in the way of natural resources compared to the others.
That's not true.
And they're doing very well.
What about the
rule of law? What do you think about the role of putting rule of law into a country as Chile did with Milton Friedman?
Those are obviously important issues. I don't disagree at all. We do a lot of activity in South America, Central America. I teach in a university in Guatemala and also in Brazil. And there's no question that all of these other things are important. They've been pointed out by Doug Casey and by others. You need to have a rule of law. You have to have at least a minimal amount of education so people will understand how the society functions. But the question is, at the margin, what accounts for a country going from deep poverty to success or from success into deep poverty? That's the real question here. And I believe that the issue of education is overwhelmingly important, even though some people on the panel do not. Go ahead, please.
Well, I live in those countries about half of the year, and I can tell you, because I've got experience with the continent where money goes to die, and it's very unwise to try to start a business there. All you can do is speculate on asset values. Nimble as a speculator, not long-term as an investor, in my opinion.
In general.
I have something to say about the rule of law. Everybody talks about the rule of law, but who is going to enforce the rule of law? Is America going to send its Marines to Nepal or to Sri Lanka, where I've done business, or to Kyrgyzstan to enforce the rule of law? If you have a person like Prachanda who comes through elections,
you're right.
It's his rule. It's
You're
not
right.
going to be the rule of law.
Yes.
And that's how it happens in third world countries.
But there are revolutions that take place. Go ahead, please.
Never in favor of rule of
Go ahead.
law. I have yet to see one.
Okay.
In
Go
my
ahead.
lifetime.
It would seem to me that the more relevant question is, why do countries become rich? In my view, the default is poverty. So it's more fruitful to find what elements of rich countries
Yes.
exist that poor countries don't have.
What
in
would
part
be your opinion?
It would be the institutions based upon rule of law that we experience in Western civilization as opposed to poor countries.
By the way,
which don't have those
unfortunately,
rules.
we're running. I just checked. We're running out of time. There's another session coming into this room. I do apologize. Thank you all very much for your participation.